one of the bigger tech companies in the world that has arguably the most successful app in the stores right now, talking about a core piece of infrastructure they're using as part of their app development.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Front End Fire podcast, the weekly show that helps you stay up to date on the latest and the greatest in the front end world. I am your host today, Paige Niedringhaus, and I am joined by my co-host, TJ Van Tol.
Hey, everybody.
And our third co-host, Jack Harrington, is actually out on vacation this week. But despite that, he still wanted to be part of the show, so we have pre-recorded his segments and we'll be dropping them in for the news and what's making him happy.
Through the magic of editing, Jack will appear with us here today, too.
Yes. So you will see some different outfits if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, because we have changed since we actually recorded those pieces of the podcast.
Yep. We're not doing quick uniform swaps, so.
All right. Well, with that out of the way, let's get on to the news for this week.
Let's do it.
Since Jack is out of the studio, we will start off with his news first.
So my news for this week is that TanStack Form is out in version 1.0, which is huge. They've actually been working on this thing for 2 years trying to get it right. And yeah, it's really cool. The React API in particular, like I've worked on forms a lot. I think we all have, right? And one of the things that I've noticed about, and I really hated about forms, is you kind of get these blocks of like field dot something, like, whatever. And then there's like this massive component in there, and it's kind of shoestrung into like the field system and all that. And it's just a mess. And so, well, you could do that, I suppose, in TanStack Form if you wanted to. That'd be kind of like the simplistic route. But there's actually another system that they have called the Composition API that allows you to go and create essentially form-connected components that are generic. So you can have like a set of a connected text field and a connected select box and a connected, all that has all the validation and stuff all wired in, and have it be generic. And then when you build your form, all you got to do is just be like, okay, I have a field, and when you render, use this. It gives you an object that has those connected components on it, so it's all type safe all the way through. And so the compression becomes amazing in terms of the complexity of each form. But what's really great is you can actually go and take those form components and reuse them across your entire application. So your form code, each form gets a lot smaller, and then the amount of reuse just goes up exponentially. So it's really cool. I'm really looking forward to kind of rolling that out.
I saw that it was using standard schema also, which we previously talked about on the show, as just like a standardized way of doing type checking. So just yet another way you do it once and it works with these tools. And so that was pretty cool to see too, because that's usually, in my experience, because I've done a lot of forms. Also, I've worked in big insurance, which is basically just
forms,
entirely forms. And the hardest parts are managing state, like you submit and getting it to your back end.
Yeah, dirty versus touch, all that stuff. Oh, God.
Because usually you want to get the UX exactly right. Like, when do you show errors? How do you do client-side errors versus server-side errors? And I've not dug into TanStack Form other than read through the blog post, but it sounds like they have a lot of stuff to help you deal with that and address that. So those are all positives in my book.
Yeah, totally. You can use Zod as an example. You can use a bunch of different ones, but let's just say you use Zod because like everybody uses Zod. But you can use Zod, and then you can hook that onto the client side, get all the client validation there, and then also hook it onto the server side. And there's a really smooth path where essentially, if they've got JavaScript off, I don't know how often that happens, but you gotta have server-side validation on your forms. Don't necessarily have to have, and it handles that whole flow for you, and it does it in a really nice and seamless way. You actually get the same error conditions and all that, like as you see it on the client side, if the person has the JavaScript off, which is, I think it's another really cool. It's a genuinely good library, and talking with the library author, I was just really impressed by the amount of work that he's put into it.
Nice. Yeah, and I mean, I think everybody who uses forms in React especially ends up using a form library because
Oh
React
yeah.
is just so painful with forms in its native state. Like I've had really good experiences with Formic,
Hmm.
and actually Ant Design does forms really well too because it kind of gives you these form item wrappers that you can just put around any other component, and it works kind of very similarly to what you're describing. It does the validation, and it does, everything is connected so you know exactly which form you're getting inputs from or which form item.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean TanStack, they just do everything really well, and everybody loves it. So I am not surprised that TanStack Form is gonna take off.
Yeah.
And did I see this is framework agnostic, right? Or at
Yeah.
least it works in a lot of different frameworks.
Yep. Yep.
Even
So
You
better.
that's
got
pretty cool too.
the composition thing. I was working because I'm building this Create TS router app thing, and it's got a form example in there, and the guy's like, hey, well, we changed, not change, but we upgrade the API. We could actually make this example a lot simpler. And that's when I actually tried out this composition API, and I was like, "Oh my god, man! If I was back at Walmart or back at Nike, I'd be like, we got to use this thing. This thing is the bomb." Um, and so I redid all that, and then I was going over to like the Solid API and doing that, and he's like, "Well, no, the composition stuff isn't there yet." So there's kind of different levels of support. They're trying to like basically see how this composition API goes on the React side, and if it's really popular, then kind of port it over to the other ones. But yeah, it's cross-platform. And it's also, if you want React Native, it handles that as well. So it's generic at that level as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Does it have other ties into the TanStack universe, considering it's does it tie into Start or
The TSU.
The TSU, the TanStack
Yeah.
Extended Universe. Yeah, it uses Store to do it. So, the mechanism that they use for doing this composition API is context. Right. And context has the downside that if you change it, if you just hold the data in the context, if you change it, then all of the connected components to that update, which is not great for performance. But in this case, they're just passing a constant, which is basically the TanStack store, just the object. And then they're using TanStack store selectors so that they get very granular updating, even though it's still using context. It's just passing around this constant context of the store address, which is fine. So it's really cool. Really
Fun.
nice. Yeah. Very exciting.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Jack. TJ, what do you have for news for us this week?
I have Lynx, which is a new framework. You cue your jokes of yet another JavaScript framework, but this one is quite notable because it is made by ByteDance. So the same company behind TikTok. And the company that was behind Trey, the editor that we talked about recently as well, apparently ByteDance is getting involved in the English open source space, which is fascinating in and of itself. But Lynx is essentially a React Native competitor. They call it a family of technologies empowering developers to use their existing web skills to create truly native UIs for both mobile and web from a single code base. Which that sounds a lot like React Native because it is very similar to React Native. It is completely open source. It's Apache 2 licensed. It is entirely on GitHub. ByteDance claims that this framework is used in TikTok's search panel and that it runs the entire TikTok Studio app. So it gives it some instant credentials, assuming they're being honest about that, which I don't know why they wouldn't be, but
Right.
part of the reason React is so popular is because Facebook stands behind it and talks about the things that they're building with it. And so the fact that TikTok is using it, a couple people use TikTok. So it's
Just a few.
it's got a little bit of a name recognition out there. And they really claim that the main reason they do this, that they're doing this and not just using some other tool, because we have other tools that not just React Native, but ByteDance was a previous proponent of Flutter. They even have a case study that's still on Flutter's homepage. And of course, there are other tools out there as well. But they claim that they're doing this for performance reasons. So the main model that they're going forward with is that it's a dual-threaded approach, that they are leaving the main thread to run a custom JavaScript engine that they built.
Wow.
They built it on top of a tool called Quick.js, which is an existing tool out there. I had not heard of it before this, but basically they built on top of this like custom JS engine that's designed to be incredibly performant and lightweight. And the main thread will handle things like your initial launch and high priority events like dealing with scroll and making sure those sorts of things that need to be really, really snappy and instantaneous are. And then the background thread is for really kind of just everything else, like your data fetching, your background tasks, and most of your code runs on the background thread. But you have these sort of interesting ways of tying into the main thread or saying some of your code can run into the main thread, which is an interesting paradigm. That's not something I've seen many frameworks exposed just raw to the user before. And I mean, it's not even something you can do. Technically on the web, you can kind of do it with web workers, but typically on the web, you're not working in a multi-threaded environment. Right. On native mobile, you can, and this kind of exposes it in the most, I guess, raw way to developers that we've seen so far.
So, usually that's what happens, though, is that these companies get their apps get so big or so performant necessary that they end up having to build their own frameworks just to meet whatever their individual needs are. I haven't looked at Lynx yet. Have you had a chance to look at any of the documentation or the code? Does it look kind of like React, JSX, or JavaScript plain? Like, what is it? Kind of give us an idea of what we might encounter if we were to try and start using it.
So I've tried out, I built a simple little thing. You can try it out now. It is out. I tried it out on a Mac. And what you do is you have to install Xcode because it runs an app on the native iOS simulator. It has you install this app that is very similar to Expo Go, where you get like a QR code and you scan it. It's not in the app stores quite yet. Presumably this is just completely brand new and they don't have that, but that's probably the direction they're heading, where there'll be a testing app out in the store. But the code looks and feels a lot like React Native. It's JSX-y. You use CSS for styling. It's again it's all JavaScript and TypeScript. The one thing is they make a big deal about how they are not tied to a framework. So they have a React-based offering, and that's what you use by default. But their implementation isn't tied to React. So they talked about in the future maybe doing this with different frameworks also. But React is what it is by default. And so it feels in I mean, I just looked at their Hello World experience. I didn't try to build a full app with this thing, but I was able to get it running. It did work. The docs are available. They are all in English, which is, I think, fascinating in and of itself, because this is a Chinese company that is not necessarily known for, Chinese companies in general just aren't known for their English proficiency. And the docs were decent. I mean, they're not super comprehensive. It's a brand new framework, but it's better than you would expect for like a day one launch of something this ambitious.
Yeah.
And that's where I learned a lot about what they're doing with threading, is because they have docs that go into that in a decent amount of detail. And it's a pretty compelling offering. This isn't just some random framework that you'd cover that somebody randomly built. This is one of the bigger tech companies in the world that has arguably the most successful app in the stores right now, talking about a core piece of infrastructure they're using as part of their app development. And so I think we have to take this pretty seriously, because they're doing some sort of interesting stuff with this.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool. And that's how we've gotten things like Angular in the past. It's how we've gotten React from Meta. That's really interesting, though. It's the first, I would say, one of the first big Chinese non-US tech offerings in the open source space. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, between their editor Trey and this, I mean, it's an interesting strategy. They talk in their blog post releasing this that they said that TikTok will facilitate the open source release of Lynx, offering support in several areas, including funding, technical enablement, community promotion, and ecosystem growth. So at least per their blog post, they sound like they're quite serious about putting this out there and trying to make it a thing. And yeah, I was impressed. I don't know. It's like I said, I haven't fully battle tested it, but just the getting started experience was pretty decent. It worked. The docs seemed decently comprehensive, and this is going to be an interesting one to watch.
I wonder if this is TikTok trying to garner some more support in favor of them not getting themselves banned from the US by open sourcing it, making it available to everybody, also supporting it. Yeah, it's not a
Well,
bad
we've got
strategy.
it really almost, you could almost broaden it to be more of a Chinese strategy in general, because we have DeepSeek out as a model, and we have some of the stuff ByteDance is doing, and it's not a country you would expect these sort of things from previously. But this is yet another just thing on the list of high quality tools that these Chinese companies are putting out there. They're open sourcing. They're thoroughly explaining how to use them in English. And I'm just kind of fascinated by the whole thing.
Yeah, and if you decentralize where it's located, it'll be a lot harder to shut it down in the future. It's already everywhere in the world.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, we will keep an eye on ByteDance because it seems like they've got a whole strategy to open source a lot of stuff, which would be, I think for the development world, it'll be great. We don't really we don't worry about that kind of thing as much as others do. So if you want to put your code out there on the web, go for it.
Especially open source stuff, because it's far harder to do something malicious when you're providing all the source code for it. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but with open source stuff, you really are exposing everything you're doing. So I see this as a good thing. It's a way to get React Native to hopefully respond to this sort of thing, and just make better tools for all of us to use.
Absolutely. All right, so my news for this week is going to be actually about VS Code. I know that we've talked about all sorts of other IDEs in the past weeks, Windsurf and Tray and things like that, but VS Code February has some pretty interesting updates for their own AI offerings. So we've in the past talked about VS Code workspaces and not VS Code. We've talked about GitHub workspaces and GitHub Copilot and all that, which it all rolls into one because Microsoft owns everything. So with VS Code February updates, we have things like agent mode improvements. So Copilot can now search your whole workspace for relevant context. It can edit files, it can check for errors, and it can run terminal commands, which they showed off to us in a little video maybe a month and a half ago, not that long ago. So it's actually out now as a preview for people who are using like the VS Code Insiders build or some of the more cutting edge, less stable versions of it. You can now have custom instructions to tailor your GitHub Copilot and provide chat responses and code suggestions for the way that you and your team work. So if you have, specific ways that you prefer your code to be done, the whole team's using async await inside of there, or you have special CSS instructions for naming variables or things like that, you can tell GitHub Copilot and it will be contextually aware of that for when it's making suggestions to you. You can attach problems as chat context and folders as well. So you can actually say, look at this whole folder's worth of code, or look at this error that I'm getting in line. Tell me how to fix it without having to copy the error, paste it in there as text. You can actually take photos of it, or even you can give it mock-ups and say, write some code that looks like this mock-up, which is pretty cool. And I think some of the most interesting and probably most useful today is that there is the preview for both GPT 4.5, which is the newest version of GPT that just came out earlier this week or end of last week, and Claude Sonnet 3.7, which does the thinking and non-thinking modes, which we talked about last episode. So those are both available for you to use as your Copilot editor. Yeah, I mean, they're moving fast with these new versions.
I think it's interesting. The two things that don't surprise me about this is the release is AI. All those features are AI. It's not like the VS Code team is working on a bunch of other new features that aren't AI related. So you can see where their roadmap and where their head is at the moment. And also, this is another round of let's just steal good ideas that these other editors have had as well. Like the file that has commands, that's basically cursor file, and like Windsurf has one like that as well. That's what makes me nervous about the long-term success of cursor and Windsurf and Tray and anybody else who tries to do this, is because if they have good ideas and they implement good ideas, what's to stop Microsoft from just taking that idea and rolling it straight into VS Code directly? It doesn't seem like that much. And so maybe these other editors can keep, they have some momentum. Maybe they can keep ahead, stay nimble. But clearly this is Microsoft trying to react to that. And I don't know. I've seen some of these already because this has been out for a day or two now. And the agent does seem a little bit smarter in about what it is doing. Previously, I had struggled with the GitHub Copilot's agent because it did struggle to figure out what other files were. So you tell it to do something and it would always try to do it in that one file. It does seem a little bit better about knowing which files are related and being able to make changes across multiple files better than it was before. This is a day or two of testing, so we'll know more after we get to try this for another few weeks. But yeah, clearly a little bit better.
Yeah. And I mean, VS Code just has the first mover advantage by a mile. So I think a lot of people who are very comfortable with their setups will be hard pressed to switch to Windsurf and things like that. So yeah, we'll see if they can keep up, because I know that that's been a criticism before, is that they just don't seem as good. But if they can get on top of these new model releases and get the agents like up to speed, it'll be hard to topple that monopoly.
But another one that's good for us competition is if these 3-4 different editors are racing to implement these features and the best ones make it to all of them, essentially. I mean, we win. That's so.
Absolutely. All right. So I think that is our main news topics for the week. Do we have bonus news?
We do. I've got a couple different small things. The first is we noticed the headline that Tailwind UI has been rebranded by the Tailwind team to Tailwind Plus. From the announcement, this sounds like not much of anything for the moment. So if you're not familiar, Tailwind UI is basically premium UI components that the Tailwind team made and that you could purchase. And their claim to fame really is that it was just a one-time payment, so it's not a subscription. You basically just buy the thing and then you have the components to use for your projects sort of indefinitely. And they've stated that isn't changing. Basically, just the name changing is making space for future things they want to do. So they talk about potentially doing custom editor themes, different color palettes, typography themes, certain community things, things related to in-person events. And I think they're just looking to have a broader name so that stuff makes sense and it's not just tied to UI components. So if you are a Tailwind UI person, it sounds like nothing changes day one, but that probably means that they're working on some cool stuff. And
Yeah, at the very end of that announcement blog, they said that they're still going to be investing in the components, so you can expect more UI components to come along. The templates is something that they also offer, which I guess are just kind of starters of components stacked together and, styled really nicely. Catalyst, which is their UI starter kit of components. I'm not completely sure how Catalyst differs from just Tailwind UI or Tailwind Plus by itself, but somehow it does.
I don't know either.
And then they said they're also working on prototyping plain HTML versions of the templates. So they're trying to go in a more agnostic direction for people who aren't using React but still want to use Tailwind. So, yeah.
Yep. Sounds like they're just working on some cool stuff, and they look really good. It'd been a long time since I'd looked at Tailwind UI, and this announcement had me just perusing their site, and it's good looking stuff. So, and it's pretty reasonable. So the pricing is, it's $300 one time to get access to it, and it's a lifetime license to it, and basically $1,000 for a team license for up to 25 people. And that's not bad at all for what you're getting.
And especially that it's not a subscription model, which is so exceedingly rare nowadays. You just pay once and you're done. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, honestly, I think that was genius of them to do it that way, because it makes me so much more interested in this. And I imagine other people have to have the same response, because everybody gets so sick of oh my gosh, am I $25 a month to just keep using this in perpetuity? And it's a relief to go back. This feels very old school. This is how we used to do software. You'd come
Right.
out, you'd buy software on a CD for a fixed cost, and it'd have a license key, and
Yeah.
that's how you
You
used
bought
it.
you bought Photoshop one time and then you used it for years before you upgraded again.
Yep. And then at some point, you'd have to buy the CD of the new one because enough years had went by, and you wanted an updated version. It's fun times.
Yeah. All right, another piece of news that TJ put into our show notes and I'm dying to hear about is called vibe coding. So I really want to know what this is.
So vibe coding, this was from an article that was on the front page of the New York Times. So this is,
Oh,
we're talking big deal here. And it's an article that the author basically talked about how he, a journalist at the New York Times, so not a coder at all, was building apps and basically had been used it to build an app that summarizes podcasts, organized social media bookmarks, building apps for their kids. Talks about all these things he's been doing with no coding. And apparently the term for that is now vibe coding. So whenever you're using Bolt or some of these other tools where you're just talking to it in
yeah.
plain text, apparently that's the word we're supposed to be using now. We're vibe coding when we're doing that.
So what is he using? Is he using bolt.new? Is he any other tools that he mentioned?
He mentioned a few, but Bolt is specifically what he's using.
Wow.
And I thought this was like, the StackBits people probably have this thing. They probably bought this paper and have it pinned on the walls of their office because we talk sometimes on the show about why is all this money going into these tools? It doesn't make any sense. This is sort of the exact reason why, because you think about StackBlitz as a company, they built a really nice tooling in the web for you can run Node apps in the browser, you can test your apps out in the browser, but they really never built much of a business around that. At least speaking from personal experience, I liked using StackBlitz, but I never paid them a cent and didn't really see a reason to pay them a cent. And so now with a tool like this, they're getting general attention and people are interested in it, and they're in the New York Times of all places.
Yeah.
And there's some serious potential here.
That is wild because, a couple of years ago, StackBlitz was a company that you probably had heard of, but maybe had never even used and didn't really know what their, unique value proposition was. And now they have New York Times, that's really mainstream.
I was also surprised by, coming from a non-technical perspective, the fact that people, and he mentioned other people too, the community of people that are building apps successfully using these tools. Because that's one thing we've questioned on this show before. It's like, oh, you can use these things to build little toys, but are people building real things? And it sounds like the answer is starting to be yes. So he also summarized in this article, it'll be in the show notes if you want to read through it. It's well written. He links to some things that exist that people have built. There's apps that people are using to track the price of eggs. Somebody was scraping Zillow listings in LA to try to find rent gouging after the fires there. And they wrote that entirely with text, right? Not with code at all. And it's an interesting world we're in now if people are starting to plausibly build some of these apps with these tools, because I would not have thought we had come to this by this point. I thought this was still a year or two off, honestly. And the future is now, I guess. People are building more powerful things with these tools. They're vibe coding their way to some more powerful apps than I really thought they were.
Yeah. Wow. That needs to be a different term because that's not where my mind goes when I first hear it. I don't know where it goes, but it's like, that was not what I was expecting.
Yeah, I don't know. But if you hear that term, apparently that's now a thing.
Okay. Now we know.
Yep.
All right. Let's go on to our fire starter for this week.
Let's do it.
So we've learned about vibe coding. The other new thing that we're going to learn about is the Invoker Commands API, which is it's brand new, still experimental, so don't put this into production. But basically, it is a non-JavaScript way to assign behaviors to buttons. So imagine you have a very simple static website and maybe you have a contact me button, or you open up a modal to show some information, or you have a popover or something like that. Instead of having to download JavaScript in order to just make that button work, there are now a command and a command for element values that you can use to make those buttons interactive, so you don't have to use JavaScript at all, which is pretty neat.
Fascinating. I've wanted this. I didn't know this was a thing, and apparently it's still experimental. But their example on here is for popovers, and I could see this. So, like, you have that little informational button, and you want to click it and show a little popover or a tooltip. It is kind of silly that we have to write the same JavaScript we've written a million times to make that show and hide when the browser can do it. I mean, it's such a common example. The browser could totally just figure that out, you feel like, and this is pretty cool.
Yeah, so the command for is what turns a button element into a button, and all you have to do is pass the ID of the element that you want the button to control, and then the command will go on that element and it will perform the specified action. So it's really that simple, and it really is like when you just need those little touches of interactivity for really simple things. It's not for more complex examples where you do need to bring JavaScript in, but if it is something as simple as close this modal, open this popover, etc. Yeah, they're working on it right now, and it's, like I said, it's still experimental, so it probably won't work in many browsers, if any, but if it does, that'll make your life a little bit easier, and probably a lot of people's.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on this one because it's a great idea. We'll just have to keep tabs on whether this ends up in browsers actually shipping.
Yeah, so that's the Invoker Commands API. We'll keep an eye on that for you.
It's a cool name too, Invoker Commands. It's good.
It is. All right. So I think that's going to take us to our last segment of the show, which is what's making us happy this week.
Woo.
We will have Jack kick us off for what's making him happy this week.
So we're watching a show on Apple TV Plus, I guess. Is that the thing? I don't know. Apple TV, which always generally comes out with like really good shows, and it's called Prime Target. And I guess the name is kind of a double entendre because it's like a little bit of a spy thing, but it's also about primes and math. And the idea is, I don't know if you saw Sneakers a long time ago.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Doesn't know.
Yeah, all right. It's a great movie. It's got, anyway, great actors in it. And the idea is that if you can figure out that primes aren't essentially random in the number space, and you can predict primes, which is what this, of course, super genius, smart guys, super math genius trying to do.
Yeah.
You could essentially just break all encryption. And, so obviously good guys want this, bad guys want this, bad guys, good guys who are bad guys want this and all that. We haven't finished it yet, but we're close. But it is, these shows are like really thick. Like we came out of like episode 4 and we're like, wait a second. This is only episode 4? This is crazy. Like, it's kind of like just like super deep and rich show. Yeah.
Well,
I'm a sucker for the like math nerd type of trope in shows. I fall for that sort of thing all the time because there was the show Numbers was a thing. That was like a detective show for a while.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a bunch of other ones like that where there's just somebody who understands math or science really, really well and uses that to either solve crime or be an international spy or whatever happens to come up in the series.
So I'm just looking up Sneakers now. And if you haven't seen it, Sneakers is actually a really good movie. It came out, I think, 92. And it's got Robert Redford, Sidney Poitier, Dan Aykroyd, Ben Kingsley. It is David Strathairn. I mean, a huge River Phoenix. Like all kinds of folks that it's a great movie, and it kind of is around this as well. There's a whole mystery around a guy that's trying to break encryption and no more secrets and all that. Yeah, it's good.
nice.
Go check out both those things.
Yeah,
Good
for
stuff.
sure. I'll add that to my list. Cool. All right, TJ, what's making you happy this week?
Pokemon Go is making me happy. I think I've talked about my love of Pokemon Go before on the show, but they just had a big event in the game. And so went out and played with my kids. And I think it's absolutely crazy that it's a game that's still going 8.5 years later. If you would have told me in 2016 when this game seemed like it was just like a one and done, everybody played it for a few weeks. If you told me I'd still be playing it almost 9 years later, I thought you'd be crazy. But they've done a really good job keeping the game relevant for people that are really into it. And it's not the sort of game that I get super excited to play every single day, because there are parts of it that do get monotonous. But what they've realized is that if they make big events out of the game, like twice a year, creating just a really big incentive to play, it gets people out and playing, gets them out with their friends, gets them doing things, gets them traveling. They have these events now in person all over the world, which is fascinating. They're having ones in New York, Paris, and somewhere in Japan coming up in June here. And it's just, I don't know, it's a fun game to play. I had fun going out. It's an excuse to go out, go for a walk, explore, and it's making me happy.
So what was the event? Like, does it have a name or something?
It was called Unova Tour because Unova is one of the areas in the original Pokemon game. So one reason they've been able to keep this game going for so long is there are over 1,000 Pokemon now at this point.
Wow.
And the original game in Pokemon Go just used the original 150 Pokemon that were in the very first video game. But they have a lot of content to pull from because they keep making Pokemon games also. So Unova is the fifth, what they call generation of Pokemon. So there's like 150 Pokemon, and occasionally they'll do events to just highlight one specific game, just give you a reason to catch Pokemon from that area. They'll, of course, there's power creep in the game, so they'll make new forms of these things that have better attacks. So they give you reason to go out and catch the same things you've been catching over and over again for years at this point. But I mean, all games do that to a certain extent, and as long as you don't take it too seriously and you just have fun with it, it can be a good time.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was actually in Greenville, South Carolina this past weekend for a friend's birthday, which is what's making me happy this week. And we walked past a restaurant that was not yet open in the morning, and there was probably 10, 15 people standing outside of it, all looking at their phones. And I'm pretty sure they were playing Pokemon Go because there must have been something good there.
That sounds like it. And this last weekend was when that event was going on. So there's probably an even better chance that they were just playing the event together, because it also, like, there's raid bosses in the game that you need a group to defeat. So it encourages people to get together and do these things together, which is pretty fun too. Nice.
Well, that probably confirms our theory then. But yeah, my thing is going to be Greenville, South Carolina. So like I said, one of my friends she had her 40th birthday this weekend, and she just organized a group trip. And for us, we're in Atlanta, so it was like a 2.5-hour drive to get up there, and the weather was beautiful. There's this river that kind of runs through the center of the city, and they've made this awesome park around it with lots of bridges and walkways, and just, I mean, you could probably spend the whole day in this park. And there's little shops along the way that are selling art and selling food, and there's restaurants, and there's everything. So it was a really fun little city to visit. It's very walkable. The food was fantastic because it's in the South, so they had lots of good Southern cooking there. Yeah, and it was just really, really enjoyable, really relaxed, really fun. We went to a dueling piano bar one night, which was very fun to watch. We went to a distillery tour the next day that was right next to the river and got to taste some fresh-made rums and tequilas in Greenville. So it was a really nice weekend, and I would highly encourage it if you are in the Southeast somewhere and you like the outdoors, because I think this is like the perfect mix of urban and rural at the same time.
I think it's probably that was the right time of year to visit too, because I imagine it gets pretty hot there coming up here, getting into the summer.
Yes, I think we got very lucky where it was mid 60s, 70s on the couple of days that we were there, and then the temperature dropped a little bit when we were coming home, but that wasn't a big deal. But yeah, in the summer, I'm sure it gets very steamy. The
Yeah,
spring and fall are probably like ideal.
that's the one thing that made our weekend a little rougher because we were trying to go out for a long walk while we were playing, but it was in the 20s and it was windy. So there's only a certain amount you can take of that. So we'd go for a little walk and then we'd go hide in the car or in a business for a little bit and then go back out. Sounds like it would have been much more pleasant playing with the group you found in South Carolina.
I think so. But good on you for making it work even with less than ideal weather.
We did our best. It could have been worse. We've had I don't know. It's looking up here. This is honestly the best time of year in Michigan here coming up because our springs and falls are usually amazing and we're just at the tail end of the winter weather. The forecast is looking great, looking nice outside, so I can't complain too much.
Excellent. Right. Well, I think that is going to wrap us up for this episode of Front End Fire. Thanks as always to our sponsor, the Blue Collar Coder channel on YouTube. If you want to find us, you can find us now on YouTube as well, or we're on X and Blue Sky and basically all the social media platforms. You can also find us on Discord. We have our own Discord server inside of the Blue Collar Coder. And you can find us on our website, frontendfire.com. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.